We bow with me, please. Fathers, we come together today. We have a wonderful, wonderful parable that you have given to us for obvious reasons, and that is, who are you? What did you do when you came here? Why did you come here? And what's the end result? And the Pharisees that challenged you every moment they could, you addressed it to them, but it's for us as well to understand the beauty that you are, the love that you are, and everything around you that we should be pursuing. Help me as a teacher to present that information today in class. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Interesting parable. It's a long one, so you're going to see in your notes there's a lot of data there. It goes back into chapter 9 of John before we get there. But first of all, let's get through the items missing from the bulletin. This week we're looking at, because it's in March, so March we're looking at people that have been part of their resolutions. Where are they at as far as their journey? So we'll pick a couple of people a day and bring you up to date on them. So those are the people looking at past glories, living past glories. Dina Kidd caught me the other day and said that Jeff was in the midst of his fruition, moving toward where he was before, and asked what was his focus. And she said he wanted to relive his nickname, Adonis Kidd, that he had as a youth. I thought, Adonis, that's an interesting one. So I pulled up Adonis, and sure enough, they could be twins. But the Adonis, I kept thinking, well, what do you do as profession? I remember it was IT, looking with computers and software. So maybe that's a software program, Adonis, which he initiated. So I went to Dina and said, Dina, is it because of a software program? She goes, no, it's his history of working with Calvin Klein. I said, Calvin Klein? I never knew he worked with Calvin Klein. So maybe he wrote a program for Calvin Klein. Well, no, she said, he's trying to live his past glory as a swimsuit model with Calvin Klein. All I can say is good luck, brother. And then Ethan, who's not here, caught me and said that he and Roger have been talking. And Roger also has a project he's working on. It's one that's got intensity for strength, endurance, and power. And I said, why would Roger need that type of program if he's working heavy equipment or driving trucks? And he said, because Roger was an acrobat for Cirque du Soleil. He wants to try to relive that. I said, Cirque du Soleil? Sure enough, I went home, pulled it up, and here's a picture of Roger working. You can see him on the left. And I said, Ethan, this is really dramatic because the forces, the torque on the shoulder when you're swinging around at that level is significant, plus the power and strength of keeping that body erect with the toes going forward. It's amazing how much force that can be generated by the acrobat. I said the other side of that too is this is done 30 feet in the air without a net. So the risk of injury and death is significant. And after I told Ethan about this and showed him that commitment, he said that Roger definitely should be committed. Going past that. This parable is the first in John. You remember the Catholic Encyclopedia, Catholic Bible does not acknowledge any from John. They're all analogies. This is a series of parables, plural. You'll probably hear at least 5 parables as we go through today. It's a wonderful, beautiful story. So let's set the story. So who are the participants or the audience in this situation? Remember that Jesus healed the blind man on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees, when the blind man went in to show them that he was healed, went after Jesus because he healed on the Sabbath. They called him a sinner. They were going to find him and confront him as religious leaders and debunk Jesus at this time. So you see that mob scene from coming from the synagogue to try to find Jesus. We know that it says in there that many people from the synagogue were there. Could have been that the father and mother of the blind man were in that because he was part of the audience before. We don't know that. Anyway, you have this mob scene coming out to get a hold of Jesus because they're going to debunk him. I'm going to take information from 2 sources. This is the first one. The other was Raymond Brown. When we steal in academia, it's called research. So I'll put the names up here because I borrowed from him. So 940 is where we start. This is really the start of the parable, and that's where the Pharisees are coming in from the synagogue, and they're going to attack Jesus. They're going to show him what's going on. He steps forward because he sees them. He's an aggressive state. He steps forward and gives them this parable. This parable is directed at the Pharisees. He calls them 5 different things: false shepherd, thief, robber, imitator, and stranger. He really attacks them because what? They have not kept up with the sheep. They were the shepherds. So we're going to go back into Ezekiel and pull that information up and go from there. So verse 1 through 5 really is a parable. It is built like a parable. We don't have the time to go through the intricate look at those aspects, but it is a parable. And so we're going to see in here that the scholars debate, is it one parable or is it series? I'm going to give you 5. You might find others in there. But it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Taking them out takes away the beauty of what this parable is all about. So you'll probably say, yes, after this, there's several parables involved in this one parable. So where does Jesus go with it? He goes back to Ezekiel, because these individuals that are coming out to get him are supposed to be what? The experts in the law. So he goes after them and says, let's go back to Ezekiel and find out what happened in Ezekiel. Well, we're not going to be able to go through that, but you'll see in that whole chapter that the shepherds, in this case, the rulers of Israel, had preyed upon, did not fed the flock like normal. They had really taken advantage of the flock. He's saying, we don't have kings anymore. You are the rulers, and you're doing the same thing those kings did back in Ezekiel's day. And God warned them at that time, I'm going to warn you again, that you're not doing what you should be doing. So now we know what the shepherd is. That's Jesus and God. And we know what the sheep is. That's a flock. We know what those 5 indicators are, the thief, the robber. Those are going to be for the Pharisees. So the false prophets are going to be removed from the false prophets. False shepherds are going to be removed from the leadership that they have. That's, remember, the thief and the robber. And then somebody else is going to come in. That somebody else is going to come in from the David line, the Davidic lineage, which they knew the Messiah was that person. He's reiterating the fact that I am the Messiah. I came here to do this. This is who I am. This is what's going to end my life on this earth, all in this parable. So we split 1 through 5, and let's look at it a little intricately, and then we'll move on to the next one. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we can go through that at that time. So he brings in this new aspect, and the discussion that is the door or the gate. We're going to go on the analogy here, or the allegory, with finding out a little bit more about what that is and going back a little bit in the culture so we get a better understanding. So this is the picture. This is the allegory. Remember we said an allegory is a picture or a text that lets us get a better understanding of what's going on. This would be the allegory. You can see the pen, the sheepfold, which is raised up with rocks. That is common within the practice of the Jewish Palestinian shepherds. You can see, and it's very hard to see, but on the very far right, they have penciled in a wolf. So the wolf is trying to find a way into the, see if I can get it. Yeah, it's right on the far right-hand side of that. So it doesn't pull up here. But anyway, the recognition here of this is that the wolf is always at the door trying to get in. And you see, Jesus says, I am the door or the gate. You see him with a lamb there. The metaphor is that he is controlling that entrance. He is supporting or protecting that flock. So anyone that comes to the sheep other than through the gate, which Jesus is the gate at this point, he's going to change. There's going to be a transition with Jesus, but at this point, he's the gate. He's the door. If anybody's going to come in and going to work with the sheep, they've got to go through the shepherd to get to the sheep. So we can see now, anybody coming over the top, anybody trying to get through any other way, that is going to be the stranger, or what we see here is the false shepherd. It is a wonderful relationship that's built in this parable as to how much love that shepherd has for his sheep. Obviously, that is a way by which we can understand Jesus' life was built on the love we have here. God did not coerce Jesus to come down. Jesus knew what he had to do. He accepted it fully, never wavered, went through the process. That's love. That's love for the Father. You're going to see a triangle built here, that the Father's love of Jesus is reciprocated, and then Jesus' love for us should be reciprocated as well as our love for God. So it's a triangle, but it all emanates from God over and then down and up. So here we see more of that love. We're not going to get to the term love until the very last of this parable, but you can see love being built all the way through. How do you like it when somebody just recognizes you as a number? How many of you like it when someone meets you and they actually remember your name? Big difference. Jesus knew every one of the sheep by name. He called them by name, personalized. So verses 1 through 5, that first parable, is going to give us the common practices. So we're going to go back in that, look at it historically, so we get a better understanding of what this means about the shepherd, the sheep, and then the pen. So the sheep in the wintertime would be close to the cities, and they also fed upon the stock and other things that were left from the harvest. But when the summertime came, they went out. So in this case, we're looking at the summertime because the sheep are moving away from where they would normally be. They're entering, what happens is that the shepherds would build a wall or a sheepfold high enough that the wolves, the lions could not traverse it. They would have to go through the gate. The shepherds slept outside of the pen with the sheep. They didn't go home. They slept there. So they protected their sheep 24 hours a day. So you see the other point here that, remember we said the false shepherd, now this is where the stranger comes in. So Jesus is telling those Pharisees, you're the stranger also in this area. So when they went through the rural area, and were very far away from the cityscape, they'd build these walled areas called a sheepfold, and they'd bed down many different sheep with them. So there are many shepherds out in the fold. Now, to get this understanding of when he calls his sheep, we've got to go back into that history. So when the morning would come and the shepherds would get out and they would call the sheep, they literally would call them, and the sheep that knew the shepherd would go. They would separate themselves because of the call of the voice. It wasn't when they had to get the dogs in and move everything around. The sheep followed the voice. Very intimate relationship of sheep and shepherd. Any questions so far? Okay. So again, going back, who are the audience? Because it's going to be very important for us all the way through this to understand who the audience is. That's the Pharisees and many people from the synagogue and the disciples and apostles. But he's talking to the Pharisee. They are the false shepherd. They are the stranger. They are the thief, etc. And then going that, so the leaders at this time, which we can see in John 9:40 and so forth, are the Pharisees. We don't see where it says the Sadducees or the scribes are involved. A lot of the theologians believe they were as well. It just seems logical. They were all together in the synagogue and they all came forward at the time. So it's kind of like a mob scene trying to get to Jesus and prove that he is not who he says he is. And Jesus is telling him, this is who I am. Point of the parable. So Jesus goes right after them and said, no, we're going to go back to Ezekiel, and you're going to remember what is there about the false shepherds, and you are the false shepherds. You're coming to get me, but I'm going to tell you who you are, because you're going to find out who I am in the process. So then he calls them thieves and robbers. Again, with that metaphor, or the allegory of the gate, that means if they're going to get to the sheep, they're going to have to climb over the fence. The sheep are going to know that they're climbing over the fence, and they're going to then call out to the shepherd the same thing. They are the thieves and robbers. So this is the other term that Jesus is going to use in this parable metaphorically for the Pharisees. So now we can see that John, it takes this parable a little bit further. He is going to give us an understanding of what Jesus is going to apply this to us. So now we have a parable. Now we have kind of parables in the parable to explain what the parable was in the beginning. A little bit of a circuitous route, but it's really, really a beautiful parable. So you can see those in your notes. Again, I've left that for you if you want to go home and look at it for personal study, but just the bulk of the data here is too much to read. So you can go back and look at it today or tomorrow. So now we've moved from different shepherds with different flocks to now, from now on, it's only one shepherd. There's only one. So the transition is going to be significant for us because instead of having a bunch of leaders, there's only one from the Davidic line that we're going to be looking at through this. Guess who that is? First it's God, and then it's going to be Jesus. So Jesus now reaffirms the fact that he is the gate or the door. He is the entrance way, which means if you go through any other way, you're not going to get what I have for you. So we'll have to look at that also in this process. So verses 1 through 5 give us an environment or the atmosphere. Very confrontive, very aggressive toward Jesus, and he's blocking their path both physically and spiritually and saying, no, this is where we're at. This is what is really happening. This is who I am. This is who you are in the parable. So the identity is understanding who Jesus is. He's going to give them one more chance. You come and get me. I'm going to tell you who I am. Your choice to believe me or not to believe me. That's it. You have your choice. But I'm going to tell you who I am. And I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to me in this parable. All of it set in motion. So we can see there's two different metaphors for the gate. We can see in the very beginning here that Jesus is the gate or the door. Then it transitions and the door changes. And it's a very interesting, subtle change, but it's significant for us to understand who Jesus was and what he did for us. So we can see here in verse 8, Jesus is the gate. So what's a gate? The gate is guarding the sheep. Jesus is the gate or door at this time because he's getting to know all the sheep by name and guarding them so that the wolves, the thieves, the robbers cannot get access to them. He also calls them impostors. And we're going to deal with the impostors a little bit, but you'll see it also translated as hireling. So the impostor is one that proposes to be something that is not. And so there's a little nuance in there we'll go through, and it's really part of the beauty of this story. So Jesus, if he is the door, which he was at this point, he cannot be the shepherd. Because a shepherd comes through the door to address his sheep. So at this time, God is the shepherd. We'll see the transition a little bit. Remember, the door at this point is very metaphorically stated as Jesus is getting to know his sheep. So it can't be both at this point, which is part of who he was anyway. When did he become the owner of the church? When did he become where he is on the right-hand side of God? When he died, the resurrection. This is the last part of this parable, the resurrection. He is leading them to the point and say, I'm the gate, the door right now. But when I die and I am resurrected, I become the shepherd. I transition, which is part of this parable as well. So the door metaphor is turned around in verses 9 and 10. It changes. Again, another parable in the parable, but it gives us a transition. So here Jesus is the door. So from that door, salvation comes. It's going to be interesting. We'll look at Raymond Brown in the pasture and what he has, and I'll just read it because it's a really wonderful text. So now it becomes the door now has a different responsibility. It's not only opening and closing, it's taking the sheep out to the pasture where they can be satisfied. Different responsibility, not just the door. So what he's saying is there's only one. You got a choice. You can choose to not come through me and you're not going to get the blessings. Or you can come through me and you get the blessings. Very categorical. This is cutting it down and saying you have a choice here. You Pharisees have a choice. Pursue which one you're going to have, but I'm going to tell you who I am and what the benefits are going to be if you follow me. So there is no way we can go and have salvation or have that life abundantly, which we're going to see in the scripture in just a second, unless we go through Jesus to get there, categorically. We can't be a robber. We can't jump the fence. We don't have the power to negotiate a change. It is either his way or not. Bottom line. So if they follow the thief, what are you going to get? You're going to get destruction. Because on the other side of the fence, the thief is going to take them out where the wolves are, and that's not going to be survival. So again, metaphorically telling what's going to happen, which one you follow, which one you choose, your choice, there are going to be the results either way. So verse 10 in this section concludes with Jesus' purpose. He's going to tell them why he's here. I came in order that they might have life. Who are they? The sheep. Who are the sheep metaphorically? Us, baptized believers. I came in order that you, put a name to it, you might have life, and that you might have it in abundance. Now that term life, we look at it, and we normally associate it with a physical life. There are some benefits physically, but this life we're talking about is what? Spiritual life. From now on, being where the abundance is. Abundance is without measure, without restrictions. That's the life he's talking about here. Any questions to this point?
Up to this point, in this parable, Jesus has been dealing with identification.
Correct.
The Pharisees and a lot of the Jews looked at Jesus. In fact, they referred to him as the Samaritan of Medina. And he told them, he said, you know, they had identified themselves as the children of Abraham. And he said, before Abraham, I am. And he specified that they need to pay attention to what he was saying and kind of his disciples. And the whole part of this parable is in context with him healing the blind man.
Mm-hmm.
Because when he healed the blind man, they just cast him out of the synagogue. And when they cast him out of the synagogue, there was a big argument with the people and the Samaritans and the leaders of the synagogue. How do you have that kind of power? And they argued, well, he's just a Samaritan and a Hebrew. And they said, well, but he has power. You want to be his disciples also? And they said, no, we're disciples of Moses. So this whole thing is identified. Jesus as that Messiah who was the conqueror of Israel and the light to the nations. And this concept of we talked about this before, he says, refers to himself as I am. It goes back to what he said before Abraham, I am. And they knew what the I am was. That's where the problem was. They didn't want to accept him as I am.
He didn't come like they wanted. They built a scenario and he didn't fit the scenario. They struggle with that scenario. In fact, the apostles struggle with that scenario and many other people. So it was a concept away from what they had. But they built it themselves. It was part of their structure with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, building all those rules, which led them to that stray. But the funny part about that, John, the funny part about that is, who stood up for Jesus? It was the blind man. The blind man challenged them. That's why he threw him out of the synagogue, because he said, well, if he's a sinner, how did he do this? He's got power from somebody, so he's got to be some power, and maybe he is the Christ. And then that's when they said, well, maybe you ought to follow him, that they kicked him out of the synagogue, which I can understand that. But you're right. This whole thing goes back to the focus of I am. The whole concept is I am. John.
Same day, is it not, that people build the Jesus they want, and people build the church they want, people build the salvation they want, instead of the salvation that's through Jesus.
You're right, that's comfort zone that is built. And it's amazing here in the comfort zone, although we all have comfort zones too, we have to deal with. And that's what that sharpening the sword is all about. But what we're finding now is that I'd rather not follow rules, I'd rather make my own, which is really a tragic situation, because in this it says, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get the wolves. So you're going to have a choice. So if you go by Jesus, where Jesus has the Bible, which we understand and we look at and use that as a foundation, you choose that, you don't get the wolves. If you don't choose that, you get the wolves. There isn't any other suggestion here for the third option, that fence straddling. So you're right. You're exactly right. Thank you. Both really good comments, because I am is a critical piece here. You're right there. Any others? Yes?
Jack, you're saying that there's only one way to get to Christ.
I'm saying it. Yeah, it is in all of what we see in the Bible, and you're right. There's the one way. We know that it's very narrow. He said it. You know, for us, when we're going to convert somebody, we find that we try to figure a way how we can fit them in so they feel understanding and can bring in. Jesus said it very directly. There's one way. It's a short way. It's the narrow way, and if you go on the other side, you get lost. It is the way. Very few are going to get in. He was very categorical, but he knew what their thoughts were, which I don't have that ESP yet. But you're right. There's one way through. Any other questions? Okay. I love this term abundance. And when he talked about abundance, he talked about when you pour the product into the container and you shift it like normal, then you pour others in. In other words, it's not just what is minimal, it's abundant, an abundant life. So Raymond Brown, oh, yes.
With what we're talking about, and if you started trying to talk to somebody about that, would you set a way that you start sometimes by telling them this is the one way?
There's inevitability, but I think we have, some of you may challenge me, what I found in the 60s beating people over the head with the Bible didn't work. Now, what I mean by that is that I believe the Bible is the foundation and we should use, but the confrontational point that we chose in the 60s didn't work real well. But that when I go that, I'll talk about where they're at, what's going on, but it always comes back to the foundation of the Bible has to be what we have laid in front of us. That's the bottom line. But I'm not going to hit them over the head really fast and say, if there's only one way, and if you don't go that way, you're out. Because more than likely, when somebody tells us we don't like something we don't like, we push back. A lot of times pushing back, they don't come back. So there's an interesting balance in that. John? That's what I was trying to get. Thank you very much. It's always good in the audience when somebody knows what I'm saying and says it better than I do. Thank you, John. Any other questions? Yeah, good. Very good point, by the way. That's a tough one, especially when you have individuals that other beliefs are there. But I think going back and finding out how we can work together is best. Did that answer your question? Okay, good. So let's look at Raymond Brown. Again, I told you that I've used his quote here, and that's looking back at what we just covered in our text. Now with the metaphor of sheep, Jesus provides the pasture of life. Very critical piece here. We could skip by, but we're not going to. We're going to spend a little bit of time here with the pasture. This pasture is abundant. It provides all that's needed, fully satisfies. Nothing else that's there. Everything is supplied. Verses 11 through 18 change the metaphor from Jesus as the door to Jesus as the shepherd. Because now a new responsibility is taken to the pasture. He is now mentoring them or moving them to where they have their best satisfaction. These verses are also built around the parallel statement by Jesus, I am the good shepherd. Again, Gary said it twice, I am. Just like God said, I am. I am the I am. How do I define myself? I am the I am. And as Jesus is taking that from here as well. In verses 11 through 14. So you can see the good shepherd changes in 11 and 14. So we'll dive into that a little bit. Several new thoughts or developments not implied in verses 1 through 5 appear. These new developments. He is going to now lay his life down for the sheep. The shepherds had to contend with ravenous animals and packs of wolves that they had to protect the sheep. Their lives, and many of them were lost because of that, but they had that responsibility. They slept with those sheep. They made sure their sheep were protected all the way through. Now Jesus in verse 17 and 18, or 11 and 12, I'll get there. Laying down in verse 11 and to 15, direct application of what Jesus is going to do for us. He's going to lay down his life for us. He doesn't stop there because he's also going to go to the resurrection, all in this parable. So the risk and responsibility of the shepherd is not only conflict-oriented material in this passage. Their life was at risk. A contrast between the genuine shepherd and the impostor appears in terms of response to impending danger. So there's a danger also with the impostor. We'll explore that in just a second with what we have from the text. The impostor flees before the wolf. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Again, the impostor is who? Pharisees. That's one of the 5 terms he's using for the Pharisee. Verse also introduces the concept of other sheep and other folds, the very last piece of the parable. One shepherd, but now we see other sheep and other folds. He's bringing in the concept of what? The Gentiles. We're going to go to the Gentiles next. You're going to reject me. We're going to go to the Gentiles, other sheep, other folds. Fascinating view with Jesus telling about who he is and what's going to happen. So we look at the impostor. Let's go back and delve in that a little bit so you get a better understanding, hopefully, of the impostor. The impostor does not mean that they're out to kill the sheep. They're not the thief, and they're not the robber. So let's define a little bit more. Now you see it also translated as hireling. That is somebody that's hired to protect the sheep. That the shepherd's not there, much like a substitute or a babysitter. But the hireling does not attempt to harm the sheep. In fact, if you look at it, that hireling is a protector, wants to protect the sheep, but when something happens, such as a wolf comes in, they're the first to leave because their life is more important than the sheep. That's the difference between the impostor and the shepherd. So here he's saying the good shepherd, which I am, he's at that point, I'm going to lay down my life for the sheep because that is where they will have that life and life abundant. Not going to be the impostor. The impostor goes through everything until the wolves come and then they run off. I will stay the course. So in verses 11 through 13, if you're following down in that, I've tried to break it out so you can see where it's not going to be too many pages away where you can get back to the text if you want to find out what I'm talking about. So the good shepherd here is now pulling it back and saying, my flock is what? The church. My flock is the church. So what I'm telling you I'm going to do as a good shepherd, I'm going to do that for you. If you follow me, you become part of the church. This is the abundant life that I project for you. If you've ever been around sheep, they are not good leaders. They're followers. They wait for somebody to give them guidance. If they get the guidance going in the wrong direction, they're in trouble. And he's saying we are the same way too. It's an interesting point too. John alluded to that just a little bit, and I was thinking about it when you did make the statement. A little ahead of me in my comments here is that, guess what? The church is not autonomous either. Individually, we don't do well. That's why it says we come together. We're brothers and sisters. We're a family. Because guess what? The strength in numbers help us as well. And so he's giving us an indication that don't go off on your own. It's not going to work. Be part of the group. Be a vital part of the group, but don't just leave. Don't think you can do it on your own. Any questions here?
Who represents the hireling, the hired hand? Is that one of the Jewish leaders that has good intentions but runs away when the wolf attacks the sheep?
Very good point, yes. So he's telling these Pharisees, even those of you that have good intentions, you're the hireling. When it comes down to you giving up your life, you're going to run away. So you're going to let those flock go on their own, and they're just basically in peril. But he is saying the best of you is the impostor. So yes, all of those metaphors are coming back to the Pharisee, pointing at them and saying, this is what you've done, this is what you're going to do as well. Very good, thank you. Pull that back in. Yes, Gary.
Jesus is setting up a scenario here. Not only are the Pharisees hearing this, but who else is hearing this? His disciples. They're hearing this. And who are his disciples? It's the 12 that he's picked and chosen. And he's going to come along at the end of John, and he's going to tell Peter, you have a responsibility. You're not a hireling. You have authority, and you are to tend and feed my flock, the sheep. And so he's setting up this concept of what authority the church has compared to what Ephesians 34 said of the authority that was going on in Israel. And that's important for us to understand that this is a learning and a teaching process, not just for these false prophets, but for these people who are disciples of his.
He's going to reiterate, very good point. He's going to reiterate all the way through here about his death. And look at how the apostles adjusted to that. Oh, no, we're not going to let that happen. So you can see that he's really trying to bring everybody here, and obviously the apostles are going to be in that focus too, and also the disciples. So it looks like that there's a large crowd around him, and he's talking to there's not only the Pharisees, not only the combative ones, but those individuals there trying to find out who he is as well. So yes, holding out. Thank you. So verse 9 and 10. We can see that this pasture leads to the abundant life, which we know that is salvation, the nurturing that Jesus and God has, the love he has for us. And then obviously, as he said, we'll have abundant life. That is our spiritual life. Many people get caught up on that and said that we're going to be millionaires and we're going to have to make very much in this life, and that's not what he's talking about. It's spiritual. So it's not just a one-time deal. When Jesus dies, that's the case. He's setting something up forever. He's building a foundation which is going to be forever in this process. He repeats on purpose, I am the good shepherd. 2 words, as Gary said, I am. I am the good shepherd. Cementing the fact on this that he is going to be the one that's going to take over from the rulers, those Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes. And if you follow him, you're going to have the abundant life. If you don't, your choice, then you're not going to have the abundant life. So we can see the relationship change. The intensity changes. Because as he's the door, there's a different intensity. Yes, he is taking care of the sheep, but not to the extent of the intimacy that happens later. You can see, and when he becomes the shepherd also, leads that group out, the intimacy changes dramatically. He not only knows them by name, he now is leading them to that place that they could have abundant life through him. So the care of the shepherd or the door changed from the first point to the second point and ratcheted significantly at that point. When he became the shepherd, that love ratcheted significantly at that point. Again, remember the love came from God to Jesus, Jesus to us, and then we reciprocate it back. We're going to see that in the scripture just in a moment. So what he's saying is the intimacy he's going to have with the church, those people that are baptized believers, he's going to have a greater intimacy than what they ever thought was going to be there if they choose to follow it. What he's done, he's mirrored just the intimacy the Father had for him. He's coming in and saying, listen, I know the Father. Father knows me. Father loves me for who I am, not that he earns it, and you'll see that in a second by his death, but because the love is there. And I love my Father. I know him. I love my Father. And I love you. And the same love that the Father and I have, you'll have. That's what he's saying. It's fascinating looking at the intimacy here within this parable. I know my own, and my own know me. Father knows me, and I know the Father. This know is not just a peripheral knowledge. It's an intimate knowledge. And that knowledge means love. It's not mentioned here, and love is not mentioned until the very end of the parable. But it all brings up the love that Jesus has and God has for us all the way through. So it's a mutual responsibility. When we're parents and we have our children, we discipline them. Why? Why do we set discipline? We love them. And we love them enough to give them another option. Where you're going is not good. I'm going to give you another option, and that option is going to be better for you overall. The children, if they understand the discipline, then will be appreciative of it. I don't know if my son, I was talking to him one day, and I said, man, I really blew it a lot in raising you. I look back at a lot of things I could have done. He goes, Dad, I don't remember any of those. I just remember now. See? That's what happens, and that's what we have here. The responsibility is us to love Jesus and to follow him. That's part of our responsibility we have. So we can see the Good Shepherd, his concerns, but we're going to have to participate. We have to accept that fully and participate in his mission if we're truly going to show the love he has for us. And we're going to give it back to him. Verse 16 turns it around, getting close to the end here. Entirely new concept. Now we have the other sheep and the other fold. This again, as I mentioned earlier, previewed it, is telling them, you're going to reject me. We're going to pull the Gentiles in. Is it a new concept for them? Shouldn't be. It's in the Old Testament. Gentiles are going to come in here as well. So he's now leading them to a part that they're probably not going to be excited about hearing. So it all comes back to now one flock, one shepherd. Just one. 1 Corinthians, wonderful, 12, when you look at it, that's the one chapter, the one body. The one. Same idea here. There's only one. One church, one flock, one shepherd. So here we see it in verse 17 and 18. It's where they connect that sheep and shepherd metaphor that was involved in the center of chapter 10. Jesus is the good good shepherd. He's going to lay down his life. This is the last part of the parable. He's going to lay down his life. If he dies and nothing happens, it's a loss. He's going to preview and say something else is going to happen here as well. So several new ideas come from this passage. Try to get through it before the bell rings. He mentions love for the first time. He's been talking about love all the way through. But now the love is associated with what act? He's giving his life. Significant love. So just this last, and we'll finish. Statement that the Father loves Jesus because the Son is laying down his life does not mean that Jesus earns the Father's love. He had the love already. I know my Father knows me. I know you, and you should know me. So it's an act of love that Jesus gives his life for us, and that love is significant. Any questions? I know we've run out of time. I had a few more slides, but I think you get the gist of this wonderful parable that just really a broad scope of who Jesus is. Any last questions? Okay, will you bow with me and we'll pray at the end. And Father, it's amazing to see the love that you present to us, that you have for us, if we just accept it. But we have to accept it. We have to get into that mission. We have to get into that belief that you are the Good Shepherd. We have to trust you, and we have to respect you in the process. Thank you so very much for giving us such a rich history in the Bible that we can draw from and grow from. Thank you for the time we've had here. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.